Larry, there is an article in the Jerusalem Post that, according to a government committee in Israel, it says that Israel must prepare for a potential war with Turkey. And how things are changing in Syria that they're thinking this way. Because before what has happened in Syria, we didn't have any sort of confrontation, or they were talking, Erdogan was talking about sending troops to Lebanon and fighting, but that wasn't that much serious on the part of Israelis. Right now, it seems that they're feeling that the situation is getting much more serious.
First of all, these radical Zionists that are in charge of Israel and effectively have been in charge for 15 plus years are the kind of people who manufacture stuff like that. They're the kind of people who give them, they're like Hitler. You give him Czechoslovakia, he wants Poland. You give him Poland, he wants France. You give him France, he wants the world. That's the kind of people we're dealing with now. Let's take all the blinders off and let's quit saying that there's any kind of democracy in Israel, that there's nothing but a warmonger in Jerusalem, and his name is Bibi Netanyahu. And oh, by the way, my latest figures show 65% of the Israeli Jewish population, 65%, hates Netanyahu's guts, mainly over the hostage issue, but they support 100% what he's doing. And then let's go back to the fact that he's our attack dog. He's doing what we want him to do. All to say, in answer to your question, the reason those kinds of things are coming out, and as I said before, if I were the king of Jordan, I'd be sweating bullets because that's where they're going to. They're not going if the United States doesn't let them go. So anything that involves bringing somebody fairly formidable into the fray with Israel, Iran, Turkey, Russia, China, we're not going to let him go there. So all of that's just bull crap put out by the whoever. There's no way that Israel's going to try to take Turkey on, and there's no way that I think they're going to try to take Iran on. One, they'll spoil Donald Trump's major first diplomatic achievement, which will be a better deal, and that's the way he'll pitch it, a better deal with the Iranians. So that's just false flag operations, if you will, on behalf of someone in Israel.
Larry, do you think that under Donald Trump, Netanyahu would be more powerful in Israel, or he's gonna lose his leverage on the political parties in Israel?
Huge question there. Let me just, here's something that I found in a Israeli publication that made its way into the New York Review this last Sunday. And this is David Schulman. He says, after describing this situation, he talks about in Beit Lakia in northern Gaza, Big General Itzhak Cohen and his division declared, and he puts it in there in quotes, and this is the New York Review, so, you know, in this case, and this is a Jewish writer, I have to kind of trust it. He says, the Brigadier General, the division commander, declared, quote, no civilians are left. That's a quote. And then he says, they were moving in, and there was a 5-story apartment building in front of them that was partially demolished. But a scout for the division said, I think I detect a Palestinian, maybe a Hamas observer on the roof. They then called in aircraft and artillery and demolished the building. They killed 100 people. They wounded an untold, they didn't even have a count of wounded. 20 children were in the dead. And then he wrote, this writer, quote, an obscene question arises. Was it worth it for a presumed lookout? And I can't help asking myself, for this we created a Jewish state? Man, that sums it up. That sums it up. Now, go back to the fact that he's doing that for us. That Brigadier General, I don't know if he knows it or not, but Netanyahu damn well knows it. They're doing it for us. As Lindsey Graham said, if they weren't doing it, we'd have to be there doing it, and we'd much prefer they do it. Thank you very much. That's what Graham said, and that's what's happening. But it's unconscionable. You know, I'm going over to the Hart Building tomorrow and meet with some people over there, and I'm just going to ask them. I'm going to say, how can you stand there in the well of the House? How can you stand there in the well of the Senate, wherever we are? And how can you not be affected by what's happening? Well, do they know? Do they know what Graham apparently knows, what Tom Cotton apparently knows, what Ted Cruz apparently knows, what the Speaker of the House, just narrowly reelected, apparently knows, what the Freedom Caucus apparently knows? Do they know that Israel is doing this on behalf of the United States of America? I suspect many of them do know categorically, and some of them suspect that that's what's happening, and that's why the money's going out. You know what Biden announced is his last deal, I guess? 8 billion. They just announced it this past weekend. Sunday, they sent a notice over to Congress. 8 billion more. It's 155 artillery rounds. It's air-to-air missiles. Think about what that might mean. Air-to-air missiles. Who do they need those for? Iran. Well, they'll run into a buzzsaw there because the United States doesn't want them attacking Iran. It's Hellfire missiles. I think I said that. It's other offensive weaponry going to them. So Blinken's going to have to lie again. It's a violation of U.S. law to be sending this stuff. This makes $18 billion to Israel that we know about in terms of arms. Now, here's another kicker. These arms are only partially going to be delivered in a tomorrow, the next week, next month basis. Most of them are going to be delivered over the next year to 2 years. So where are they coming from? Coming from the U.S. War Reserve stocks in Israel, which are bleeding our stocks down, making us further incapable of conducting any kind of combat if we had to, and probably going to be made in the United States and shipped to them. That's why they're taking so long to get there. Oh, okay, that's more money for the defense contractor. So now we have even more reason to damn the Biden administration. Money for killing children. Money for killing children. That's what this is all about. And Biden is going out with no apologies, no mea culpas, nothing, just sending another $8 billion to Israel. This is unconscionable. And Biden and Sullivan and Blinken should sneak out of the White House in the dark of night.
Larry, we know that Hezbollah was talking about that they're going to deal with Israel if they continue with this attitude of attacking southern Lebanon. Right now, Hochstein announced that Israeli army, Israeli forces has already started withdrawing their troops, their forces from southern Lebanon. Is it coming from the attitude of Hezbollah and the fear of having a new fight in southern Lebanon while they're having this conflict, as we talk about in Syria? What's going on?
It's an interesting question. I just read this morning in Haaretz and one other periodical that they have not convinced much more than about half of the Israelis to move back into their homes on that northern portion where they were afraid of Hezbollah, and so they moved out. And apparently that half has said, not on your life, we're not going back because we don't think the situation is secure enough. The other half, I guess the intimation in the article was the other half has agreed, and whether they're back or not, I don't know. But I know that Israel hasn't honored a single day, maybe not even a single hour of this ceasefire. The only reason they quietened some of their actions, which are still going on since the very first day of the supposed ceasefire, was because they knew we were going to do, Erdogan was going to do, we were going to do what happened in Syria. We knew that was going to happen. We didn't know it was going to unfold that fast, but that even caused Israel to back away from the southern part of Lebanon quicker because they had to put forces down there to take that territory in the Golan. And now they've taken miles, kilometers outside the Golan. So, but they haven't honored the ceasefire at all. So I don't blame Hezbollah for feeling like, they've been cheated and wanting to resume the conflict. I don't know how they're going to do it, though. They probably have enough residual power to do it for a while, but they're probably signing up. Again, remember, they're against the empire. They're not against Israel per se. They're against the empire, always standing behind Israel. So that means Israel is going to have all the JP8, all the 155, everything they need to pursue this conflict. And, oh, by the way, they aren't going to get Lebanon back. Israel will stay in the parts of Lebanon that it makes it into, probably all the way to the river and maybe beyond. And Lebanon will be a truncated, if any state at all, it'll be a truncated state, like much of the rest of the region. Syria is going to lose a sizable piece of territory and a lot of water over there on that extended Golan Heights side of the Syrian Golan Heights. So I don't know what the Hezbollah's intent will be other than to die valiantly, because, again, they're up against the empire. They're not against Israel. They're against the empire. If they were against Israel, they'd have beat them a long time ago. So would most of the other conflicts that Israel's been involved in. I didn't realize how badly this was the case until I started studying it a little more intensely. Israel's never been capable of handling on their own. They've, from Golda Meir on, from Ben Gurion on, they've always said and professed and stamped their foot when they said it that they wanted to stand on their own. They wanted to be their own power, military and otherwise. So they never have been. Never. Not in their history. Not since 1948. The United States has always held their hand. And since George W. Bush, the president I served, we've done more than hold their hand. We said in the Oval Office to Ariel Sharon, over to you, boy. Go do it. Go do it. The old cowboy, George W. Bush. Go do it. Do whatever you got to do. So that means the United States is with them come thick or thin.
Larry, it seems that they're talking, Israelis and Hamas are talking to each other in Qatar. Do you think that would achieve any sort of agreement before Donald Trump taking office?
I certainly hope so. And if there is an agreement, he'll probably scream and holler that it was because of his threat. But I don't trust Netanyahu. Just do not trust Bibi Netanyahu. I wouldn't trust him if I were standing in front of him and he had a pistol and I had a pistol and I could whirl faster than he could shoot. I still wouldn't trust him because he'd have 3 snipers on the side shooting me at the same time he was having a gun battle with me. I just don't trust him. And apparently the Israeli citizens increasingly don't trust him either. That's the one issue they really don't like him at all for. They don't think he cares about the hostages at all, and I think they're right.
And with Turkey right now, it seems that Turkey is doing each and everything at its disposal to bring these people in Syria into the community of Muslim countries. How successful is that going? They went to Qatar and Turkey, all these Arab states. And just remember, Annalena Baerbock from Germany went to Syria.
Yep.
Did you see the photos?
Yes, I did. Yeah. I think Scott's right too. This is an aside, but I think Scott's right. Europe's done. Europe is done for 30 years, if not longer. They're toast. And England is done. It's toast. Maybe Brexit was the right thing for them to do because now they can die on their side of the channel and Europe won't have to stand the smell of their death. But Europe itself is dying too. A new Europe is going to be born, of course. And a huge question arises. Which camp will this new Europe court? Which one will it be in? If we have to do camps, I think that's absurd. But if we do, then I would suspect Europe would probably decide that it's best protected on the side of neutrality or on the side of watching the power shift wash over them and picking up the pieces afterwards, dealing with both sides. And increasingly dealing with China. That's inevitable. That's Mearsheimer and Haas, Richard Haas, my old boss. They're right about that. But why does that have to mean war, like Richard and Mearsheimer say? Why does it have? If they're saying that the empire is incapable of any other response other than beans and bullets, okay, maybe I'll buy that. Reluctantly, I'll buy that. The only thing we know is war and sanctions and more sanctions. But if they're saying that it's because of China that this war is inevitable, that's nonsense. China doesn't want war.
And they do have right now, Larry, when you look at BRICS, China is a huge engine with all of these countries who are capable of providing China with energy. Here comes the question. If we see the things the way that Donald Trump sees, and he wants to confront China, he has to do something in order to make some sort of disconnection, because right now, whatever the Biden administration did during the last 4 years, they were all benefiting China, I would say, after all. Because the sanctions on Iran, China would receive the Iranian energy cheaper than ever.
Yeah.
They're receiving the Russian energy, the Russian oil cheaper than ever. And how do they, because it's a huge, colossal failure.
Well, one of the things Blinken said that was absurd was that our policies have helped NATO and helped Europe. We've destroyed NATO, and Europe is floundering around in the wake of that destruction and is going to flounder even more. And your comments about Iran just awakened in my head what I heard this morning, and we'll hear again at lunch on Thursday. Iraq's oil sales have fallen off. And it's somewhat inexplicable, I think, because its biggest customer was China. If Iran has filled that gap to the extent that it's caused Iraq's oil sales to fall off, then they are doing significant business. And that makes your point. That makes your point. And that makes my point, too, about this power shift is inexorable. It's just inexorable. There's nothing you can do to stop it except maybe use nuclear weapons and destroy the world. And that is what gets my goat, that we're going to put a proposition forth that winds up being that ending, that the only way we stop this shift when we realize it's inevitable and inexorable is use nuclear weapons. That's really frightening. And the more I think about it, the more I think it is becoming a reality that we would do that, just as we would do it in a war over Taiwan, which really bothers me about Haas and Mearsheimer and other people's positions on Taiwan. We have two camps developing now. I'm told Musk is in one camp. That must mean Trump would be there too. I don't know. And that camp is, no, we would not come to Taiwan's defense, because they understand that it would probably lead to nuclear war and it wouldn't be productive. And then the other camp is adamant about, we must defend Taiwan. We must convince the Chinese we will do it. And then if they call our bluff, we need to do it. I don't think the Chinese are going to call our bluff. So that might be the safer short term for the short term policy. But either way, it's not going to work. It's simply not going to work to look at the U.S.-China relationship through the lens of Taiwan. That's a lens that's cloudy. That's a lens that we have clouded. It's a lens that we don't need to look through to understand the U.S.-China relationship, unless we look through the communique and the policy that's worked for years and years. But no one wants to do that anymore. Everyone either wants to be clear or cut loose. I don't think either one of those options is a good option. But I also don't think a war with China is a good option. And people who say it's inevitable are just, in my view, they're fools. Because what you're saying is the defeat of the United States in a conventional confrontation is inevitable, and therefore we'll go nuclear. And if they think we won't go nuclear, come play a war game with me. You play the president of the United States, Richard, John, whomever. You play the president, we'll do the war game. And we got to do the war game in accordance with oil. We got to do it in accordance with the composition and the capabilities of the U.S. military right now, which are not all that hunky-dory. Got to do it. I've done it when they were prime. I've done it when they were the forces that went into Iraq in 1990-91. I've done it when they were at the peak of their technological prowess, at the peak of their troop prowess, at the peak of morale, at the peak of their armored prowess, at the peak of conventional warfare prowess. They went into Iraq. It wasn't just Saddam Hussein didn't have much. It was the fact that we were probably the best army on the face of the earth. Air Force too, Navy too. We aren't anymore. We aren't anywhere near that force. We have done nothing but go down since then. So, okay, you want to fight China? You want to say it's inevitable you fight China? We're going to do it with nuclear weapons. And if you like that, I don't like you.
Here is, Larry, here is what Antony Blinken said about this strategy against China.
As I said before, in the absence of American diplomacy, you're going to have diplomacy by lots of other countries that are going to shape the world in ways that may not be so friendly to our own interests and our own values. So that's a choice. We can disengage. We can not be present. We can stand back. But we know others will step in. And we have to decide whether that's in our interest.
I mean, it's not that he wants to stand back. It's that he uses other methods to make countries bend to America's will. You're seeing some of these actions.
Let's take an example. Let's take a concrete example. Let's talk about China for a minute. I think President Trump was right during his first administration in identifying some of the challenges posed by China. No country has the capacity that China does to reshape to its own will and designs the international system that we and many others put in place after the Second World War. It has the military power, the economic power, the diplomatic power to do that in ways that no other country does. And we also know that many of the practices it's engaged in have been grossly unfair to our workers, to our companies, undercutting them, driving them out of business. So I think he was right in identifying that problem. Where I would disagree with the approach he took, and where I would commend to him the approach that we pursued, is we're so much more effective in dealing with the challenges posed by China when we're working closely with other countries. So if you're trying to take on the China problem, but at the same time you're taking actions that in one way or another alienate allies and partners, you're likely to be less effective in dealing with China. When we took office, the European Union was on the verge of signing a major trade agreement with China. They were hedging. They weren't sure if they could count on the United States. We'd had real challenges in the relationships in the preceding 4 years, and they were hedging toward China. So were many other countries. We were really on the decline when it came dealing with China diplomatically and economically. We've reversed that. And so I think the difference is the way we've approached it is we've sought to bring other countries in to dealing with this challenge. When we're dealing with China's economic practices that we don't like, and we're doing it alone, we're 20% of world GDP. When we've aligned Europeans, key allies and partners in the Asia Pacific, we're suddenly 40, 50, 60% of world GDP, something that China can't ignore. And again, what I've seen over these last 4 years is a convergence in the approach taken to China with Europe and with Asia that we've not seen before. And I know it's succeeding because every time I meet with my Chinese counterpart, Wang Yi, the foreign minister, he inevitably spends 30, 40 minutes, 60 minutes complaining about everything we've done to align other countries, to build this convergence in dealing with things that we don't like that China's pursuing. So to me, that is the proof point that we're much better off through diplomacy.
I wish you'd let me go statement by statement, pause, and let me refute him completely, because he is an idiot, or, and I think this is more likely, he is a pure, quintessential exponent of this kind of strategy that I'm saying has been so destructive. You know why we did Nord Stream 2? He just told you. He told you why we took down the German supply line coming from Russia. He told you in crystal clarion terms. We did it because we saw them getting too close to China. That's been our strategy, a very destructive strategy for Allies. Why did we do Ukraine? We did Ukraine. We are doing Ukraine in order to embroil Russia and then get at China. He just gave you an explanation of the most disastrous security and foreign policy the empire has pursued, certainly since World War II. And he's been a major architect of that strategy over the last 4 years, with a willing and complacent and compliant president, apparently, because the president knew this guy before he even took him aboard. And I haven't even mentioned Gaza yet. You know, I can't even remember his name. I don't want to remember his name. Tony, do you think our support of Israel for the past several months has enhanced the international reputation of the United States of America and the rules-based order, or has it made us a pariah along with our pit bull attack dog in the Levant named puny little Israel? What do you think, Tony? He just gave you a perfect explanation, as if he were giving it as a defense of his strategy of why we're broke down right now and headed for a cliff. And Wang Yi lecturing him, I wouldn't doubt Wang Yi lectured him a bit. Wang Yi didn't lecture Richard Haas and me when we were over there and met with him. We had lunch with him. He didn't lecture us. We had a good conversation. The conversation was about helping China beat its HIV/AIDS problem, which we subsequently did and gathered lots of thanks from them. And it was about things that we normally talked about, like Taiwan and like Tibet and other things, and religion in China, especially Catholicism. And they relented a little bit on Catholicism in China. The basic problem China had was they didn't want the Pope running any part of China. And, you know, we actually had that problem when John Kennedy ran for president. There were people who wouldn't vote for John Kennedy because they thought the Pope would then run America. Well, we had good conversations. It's called diplomacy, Nima. It's called meaningful diplomacy, positive diplomacy. I don't blame Wang Yi for lecturing that jerk.
Larry, how much of leverage these people have on the coming administration? Do they have? Because we know that they have been connected. They have been talking with each other. Waltz talking to Jake Sullivan and Anthony Blinken. Are they going to insert the same sort of policy, or I would say they're going to convince these people who are coming to power to go after the same sort of policies?
There's one place where I might side with Scott. You know, I'll say, I hope, I don't know about these people he's picking for his appointees, apparently. I dare say that most of them are probably gullible and will listen to the people who are in power right now and in the transition process and whatever. National Security Advisor certainly looked that way. But I don't think Trump's going to buy that. Here's where I'll side with Scott. I don't know what Trump's going to do. That's where I don't side with Scott. But I don't think he's going to agree with that. If someone comes in with a previous policy that they've gotten from this administration and tries to sell it to Trump, he's probably going to put that man down or that woman down as fireable within the next month or two. Because I don't think Trump buys any of this viscerally. He's got other ideas, and you just played a tape that shows some of those ideas, preposterous though some of them might be. But I don't think his idea is to correspond chapter and verse with this administration. I think it's quite the opposite. I think he wants a dramatic departure from what this administration has done. I think what Blinken just said there, take it point by point, Trump will try to reverse everything he said, to include what many people think Trump might even do more strongly than Biden and Blinken did, and Sullivan. I can't leave Sullivan out. And that is be hard on China. I don't think Trump's going to be that way. I think we're going to have some deal making with China, which is what China wants. They can do the deals. They know they can stand up in the deals just as well as Trump. And Trump thinks he can stand up with them. So let's deal. Let's deal economically. Let's deal socially. Let's deal culturally. Let's deal diplomatically for the first time in 4 years. And let's stop this war fighting by proxy or whatever. And let's actually see if we can coexist. And we are basically responsible. Now, I can't put all this on Biden, but they kept it up. They kept it up strongly with their nuclear posture review. But this is basically my president, George W. Bush, starting with the abolition of the ABM treaty, doing away with every treaty, and thinking now that we can win a nuclear war as long as we start it. I mean, that's basically what Strategic Command said a few months ago. That we don't want a war. We don't want a war. But if it starts, we'll win it.
Larry,
No
you
one,
mentioned
no one wins a nuclear war. No one.
No.
And someone needs to say that from the empire. Someone from the empire, hopefully Trump would say that. No one wins a nuclear war. I do not want a nuclear war. I will not start a nuclear war. That's my first public statement. But
maybe I'm optimistic, but I don't feel that Donald Trump is willing to have any sort of war or wars in Ukraine. I do believe that he wants to put an end to the conflict in the Middle East and in Ukraine. I don't know if I'm right or wrong, but
I don't
it
know
doesn't
either.
seem to me that he's interested in that.
I don't know either. I find myself agreeing with you, though, on the wish. And were he to do so, hell, I might even wind up voting for him. or J.D. Vance or whomever. I mean, we've got to get off this war kick. We've got to get off this sanctions kick, and we've got to get off the war kick. I'm amazed, Nima, that we are talking about doing what we're doing in Syria, and we've eased one or two things that really are microscopic, but we should have lifted sanctions completely. We should have lifted sanctions completely already. Now, I know we're building up our troop presence up there in that corner, and I know that Erdogan just said that he's defeated all the rogue elements of the Kurds, and now he's ready for peace with the Kurds. And I know the Kurds are providing the basic security for those American soldiers and Marines that are over there. So, but we haven't done the most important things we could do. Now, you could argue, and I'm sure that probably his Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, and maybe his Secretary of Defense, whomever that's going to be, they could argue that we're waiting to see if this guy's honest, if he's really intending to be respectful of all the minorities, respectful of all the different tribes and ethnic groups in Syria, wanting to work out some way to put representative government in place, take a few years, 3 to 4 years, I think he said. If he's serious about that and he wants to do it, the most important first step for America to take is to lift those sanctions. What an example to Iran, too, when Donald Trump is maybe going to negotiate a new nuclear deal. I think that's becoming more and more possible. What an example to Iran if we lifted the sanctions on Syria and then promised the same thing to them should they make a good deal. I mean, this is a time for Trump to exploit in a positive way if he's capable of doing so.